Welcome to the Brief History Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Knight. This is part 3 of the Syrian Civil War. Thank you for everybody who's listened so far. This episode will feature the Douma chemical weapons attacks. Normally I would suggest that you do listen to part 1 or 2. However, as this concentrates on the recent attacks, then you can dip in and out. You don't necessarily have to listen to 1 and 2 to enjoy it. But please, if you do enjoy it, go back and listen to 1 and 2 as it's important information. Thank you for Harry Edmondson, who provides the composing and the editing of the podcast. Thank you for everybody who has listened previously, left comments, reached out to us to suggest improvements, or thanked us and told us how much you enjoyed the episode. Please carry on. You can find us on all the social media platforms. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat and Twitter. On all of them we're at B History Podcast. Please follow us, like, share and reach out to us. We really do appreciate it. If you give us a 5-star rating or a review on iTunes or anywhere else you listen to this podcast, please do. It really does help. It takes seconds. Think of it as your good deed of the day. Please help us out. And any new podcast relies on the generosity of its listeners, so please give us a 5-star rating. If you subscribe to the podcast on your normal podcast listening device or app, then you'll be notified when the next episode comes live. You don't need to do anything further. Please enjoy. The Syrian Civil War is an ongoing multi-sided armed conflict in Syria fought preliminarily between the Ba'athist Syrian Arab Republic, led by President Bashar al-Assad, along with its allies and various forces opposing both the government and each other in varying constellations. The unrest in Syria, part of a wider wave of 2011 Arab Spring protests, grew out of discontent with the Assad government and escalated to armed conflict after protests calling for their removal were violently suppressed. The war is being fought by several factions: the Syrian government and its international allies, a loose alliance of Sunni Arabrebel groups including the Syrian Army, the majority-Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, the SDF, Salafi jihadist groups included al-Nusra Front and the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant ISIL, with a number of countries in the region beyond being either directly involved or providing support to one or another faction. Iran, Russia and Hezbollah support the Syrian government militarily, with Russia conducting air operations since September 2015. On the other side, the US-led international coalition established in 2014 with the declared purpose of countering ISIL have conducted airstrikes against ISIL in Syria as well as against government and pro-government targets. Turkey, on the other hand, have become deeply involved since 2016 and beyond, actively supporting the Syrian opposition, occupied large swathes in Northern Syria. International organisations have accused the Syrian government, ISIL and Syrian rebel groups of severe human rights violations and many massacres. The conflict had caused a major refugee crisis. Over the course of the war, a number of peace initiatives have been launched, including March 2017 Geneva peace talks on Syria, led by the United Nations. The fighting continues. On the 7th of April 2018, a chemical attack was reported in the city of Douma, with 70 people killed and 500 injured. On-site medics stated that the cause of these deaths was exposure to chlorine and sarin gas. The Syrian government denied any use of chemical weapons. Following the incident in Douma, the United Security Council failed to adapt 3 competing resolutions on an inquiry into the alleged chemical attack, with Russia and the US clashing over the issue. Following the incident, Syrian government forces entered and established control over the city of Douma, ending the 5-year siege of Ghouta. The militants of jihadist al-Islam had been previously occupied the pocket were transported to Jabal al-Assad. On the 14th of April 2018, the United States, United Kingdom, France, launched missile strikes on multiple government targets in Syria as a response to the suspected chemical attack in Douma. On the 19th of April 2018, the Syrian Army and allied Palestinian groups began an offensive against the Yarmouk camp for the Palestinian refugees, which had at least partially been occupied by ISIL. The offensive resulted in the deaths of at least 19 ISIL militants and at least 15 pro-government fighters. However, at least 19 civilians reportedly killed in the campaign, as well as at least 150 injured. Sarin, mustang agent and chlorine gas have been used during the conflict before. Numerous casualties led to an international reaction, especially the 2013 Ghouta attacks. A UN fact-finding mission was requested to investigate alleged chemical weapons attacks. In 4 cases, the UN inspectors confirmed use of sarin gas. In August 2016, a confidential report by the United Nations and the OPCW explicitly blamed the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad for dropping chemical weapons, chlorine bombs on the towns of Talamis in April 2014 and Sarin in March 2015, and ISIS for using sulfur mustard on the town of Maria in August 2015. The United States and European Union had accused the Syrian government of conducting several chemical attacks. Following the 2013 Ghouta attacks and international pressure, the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons began. In 2015, the UN mission disclosed previously undeclared traces of sarin compounds in a military research site. After April 2017 Khan Shaykhun medical attack, the United States launched its first attack against Syrian government forces. Many nations, including but not limited to Syria, the United States, Russia, China, Israel, and India, and not parties to the Convention of Cluster Munitions, have used cluster bombs, though they do not recognise the ban on the use of cluster bombs. The Syrian Army is alleged to have begun using cluster bombs in September 2012. Steve Goose, director of the Arms Division at Human Rights Watch, said, quote, "Syria expanding its relentless use of cluster munitions, a banned weapon, and civilians are paying a price with their lives and limbs," end quote. The initial toll is only the beginning because cluster munitions often leave unexploded bombs that kill and maim long afterwards. Thermobaric weapons are also used. Russia, also known as the fuel air bombs, have been used by the government during this war. One Berentino thermobaric rocket launcher can obliterate roughly 200 to 400 meters with a single salvo. Since 2012, rebels have said that the Syrian Air Force is using thermobaric weapons against residential areas occupied by rebel fighters, such as during the Battle of Aleppo, North Syria. A panel of United Nations human rights investigators reported that the Syrian government used thermobaric bombs against the strategic town Qusayma in March 2013. In August 2013, the BBC reported on the use of napalm-like incendiary bombs on a school in northern Syria. On the 2nd of November 2015, the National Interest reported that Russia was deploying a TOSI-1 Berentino multiple rocket launch system to Syria, which is designed to launch massive thermobaric charges against infantry in confined spaces such as urban areas. In Douma, the Union of Medical Care and Relief Organisations, a humanitarian organisation that supervises medical services in the region, attributed 70 deaths to the attack. On-site medic reports chlorine gas and sarin agent was caused the deaths. A video from the scene showed dead men and women and children with foam at their mouths. The Syrian American Medical Society reported over 500 injured people at Douma were, quote, brought to local medical centres with symptoms indicative of exposure to chemical attack, end quote. The Syrian American Medical Society, SAMS, also said a chlorine bomb struck a Douma hospital, killing 6 people and that another attack with mixed agents affected a building nearby. According to the Syrian opposition groups, witnesses also reported a strong smell of chlorine and said effects appeared stronger than in previous similar attacks. Syrian opposition activists also posted videos of yellow compressed gas cylinders that were said were used during the attack. Based on the symptoms and the speed with which the victims were affected, medical workers and experts suggested either a combination of chlorine with another gas or a nerve agent was used. Several medical monitoring and activist groups, including the White Helmets, reported Syrian Army helicopters dropped barrel bombs on the city of Douma. The bombs, suspected to be filled with chemical munitions such as chlorine gas and sarin, caused several convulsions in some residents and suffocated others. The day after the chemical attack, all rebels controlling Douma agreed to deal with the government to surrender the area. In the early hours of the 9th of April 2018, an airstrike was conducted against Taiz military airbase. 2 Israeli F-15I jets reportedly attacked the airfield from Lebanese airspace, firing 8 missiles, of which 5 were intercepted according to claims by Russia. According to the Syrian Observatory from Human Rights Monitor, at least 14 people were killed and more were wounded. Al-Masdar News reported 7 Iranian soldiers among the dead. On the 10th of April, member states proposed competing UN Security Council resolutions to handle out the response to the chemical attack. The US, France and UK vetoed a Russian proposed UN resolution. Russia also vetoed the US's proposed resolution to create, quote, a new investigative mechanism to lock in to chemical weapons attacks in Syria and determine who is responsible, end quote. On the 14th of April, France, United States and United Kingdom launched airstrikes against 4 Syrian government targets in response to attacks. The airstrikes were claimed to successfully destroy the chemical weapons capabilities of Syria. Nevertheless, according to the Pentagon, Bashar al-Assad still retains the ability to launch chemical weapon attacks. On the 10th of April, the Syrian and Russian governments invited the organisations for the prohibition of chemical weapons to send a team to investigate the attacks. The investigators arrived in Douma on April the 14th. However, their access to the site was blocked by Russia and Syria. On the 17th of April, the OPCW was promised to gain access to the site, but had not entered Douma and were unable to carry out the inspection because a large crowd gathered at one site while their reconnaissance teams came under fire during a reconnaissance to visit the other site of the purported chemical weapons attacks. According to OPCW director, quote, on arrival at one site, a large crowd gathered and the advice provided by the UNDSS was that the reconnaissance team should withdraw, end quote, and quote, at site 2, the team came under small arms fire and explosive was detonated. The reconnaissance team returned to Damascus. However, the OPCW statement did not lay blame on any party for the incident. The United States believes the Syrian government is stalling the OPCW to give itself time to remove evidence. On the 19th of April, OPCW still were unable to access the site. According to the US State Department spokeswoman, there was, quote, credible information that Russian officials were working with the Syrian regime to deny and to delay these inspectors from gaining access to Douma and to sanitize the locations of the suspected attacks and remove incriminating evidence of chemical weapons use, end quote. OPCW inspectors visited the site and collected samples on April the 21st. The organisation said it would submit its member states a report, quote, based on analysis of the sample results as well as other information and material collected by the team, end quote. CBS journalist Seth Doan also travelled to Douma on the 16th of April with a neighbour reported a choking gas that smelled like chlorine. A man took him to the alleged site of the impact and showed where the remains of a missile rested. Elliot Higgins, a citizen journalist and a blogger investigating the Syrian Civil War, concluded, based on geographical, video and open source evidence, that the chlorine gas was dropped by helicopters coming from Douma Air Base. Military officials in London, Paris and Washington also insisted attacks came from Douma. Journalist Robert Finks visited Douma and spoke to doctors belonging to this clinic where the footage of the victims were filmed. Fisk described his encounter with one such doctor who said that the children in the video were not affected by a chemical attack but by oxygen starvation while dwelling in the trash-filled tunnels of the city. The doctor added that during the bombardment, a large dust storm engulfed the tunnels and the children suffered from hypoxia. Fisk also stated that many people living in Douma did not believe a chemical attack happened. Fisk travelled to the same media convoy with the CBS News and the TV4, which gave eyewitness accounts and interviews contradicting Fisk's account, with the civilians died from, quote, dust. The Guardian reported testimony from several witnesses that medical personnel in Douma have often been coerced into denying the existence of a chemical attack, with themselves and their families allegedly being threatened by the Assad regime if they offer any public testimonies. On the 12th of April, French President Emmanuel Macron said that he proved that the Syrian government attacked the town of Douma with chemical weapons, at least used chlorine. The BBC quotes UN officials as saying urine and blood samples taken from the victims have tested positive for traces of chlorine. The Foreign Minister of Iran spokesman said, quote, while the Syrian army has had the upper hand in the war against armed terrorists, it is not logical for them to use chemical weapons. Such claims and accusations about chemical weapons used by the Americans and some Western countries signal a new plot against the government and nation of Syria and is an excuse for military action against them. End quote. On the 10th of April, US President Donald Trump, UK Prime Minister Theresa May and French President Emmanuel Macron said in a statement following joint telephone calls they had, quote, agreed that the international community needed to respond to uphold the worldwide prohibition of the use of chemical weapons, end quote. The Qatar Foreign Minister condemned the use of chemical weapons and called for an investigation into the incident and for the punishment of those involved. On the 13th of March 2018, the Chief of the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Valery Germazov, said that the Russian military had, quote, reliable intelligence, end quote, that suggested the rebels holding the Eastern Ghouta, along with the White Helmets activists, were preparing to stage and film a chemical weapons attack against the civilians, while the US government would blame it on the Syrian forces and use it as a pretext to bomb the government quarter in Damascus. In the event that the lives of Russian servicemen should be threatened by US airstrikes, Germazov said Russia would respond militarily against both the missiles and the platforms from which they are launched. Germazov's statement was interpreted by Nick Robertson at CNN as an indication that the chemical attack in Douma had been planned by Russia in advance as an asymmetric warfare tactic in response to reactions by the West after the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal. The Russian Foreign Ministry on the 8th of February denied chemical weapons had been used. A few days later, the Russian military said members of the White Helmet organization filmed a stage attack, and Russian expert who researched the site on the 9th of April had detected no trace of chemical weapons. Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashkov said Russia had evidence of the United Kingdom's direct involvement in the organization, what he referred to as the provocation for Eastern Ghouta. On the 13th of April, the Russian Ministry of Defense said Britain staged the attack in order to provoke US airstrikes. On April the 16th, Alexander Shoigu, Russian envoy to Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons said Russia had irrefutable evidence that the attack in Douma was staged by UK secret services and pseudo-humanitarian NGOs that work under foreign advisories of the Syrian government. The Guardian described Russian state media as pushing two lines. They had spoken to witnesses denying the occurrence of any attacks. They had found chlorine-filled canisters in Douma used for rebel attacks, later blamed on the regime. On the 18th of April, Russian state TV broadcast aired an interview with a boy who the TV program said was featured before in a hospital video taken by the White Helmets. The boy said, quote, "They were filmed being doused in water and given other simulated medical treatment at the hospital," end quote. The Intercept analysed the video and found it was filmed not in the boy's hometown where a suspected chemical attack took place, but a Syrian Army facility where Russian military advisors were present. On April the 26th, Russia and Syrian officials brought 15 Syrians to a news conference in The Hague who said they'd not seen any evidence of chemical weapons being used in Ghouta. The Minister of Foreign Affairs in Saudi Arabia condemned the use of chemical weapons and stressed that the need for a peaceful solution based on the principles of the Geneva Declaration and UN Security Council resolution. In Syria, the Syrian state-owned Syrian Arab News Agency reported a foreign ministry source called allegations of Syria's use of chemical weapons an unconvincing stereotype. In Turkey, a spokesperson for President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that the Syrian regime must give account for the attacks in various regions of the country at different times and called upon the international community to address war crimes and crimes against humanity. In the United Kingdom, Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said that latest reports must urgently be investigated and the international community must respond, and that investigators from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons are looking into reports of chemical weapons used in Syria have our full support. Russia must not yet again try to obstruct these investigations. He also condemned the use of chemical weapons in general, adding that these responsible for the use of chemical weapons have lost all moral integrity and must be held in account. In the United States, President Trump condemned the attack on Twitter, heavily criticising Russia over it. Donald Trump cancelled his trip to the 8th Summit of the Americas, sending Vice President Mike Pence in his place. On the 11th of April via Twitter, President Trump told Russia to get ready for nice and new and smart missiles. Vasily Nebenzia, Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, said the United States would bear responsibility for any illegal military adventure they had conducted. The following day, Trump appeared to soften his resolve, tweeting he never said when an attack on Syria would take place. Could be very soon and not so soon at all. US Defense Secretary James Mattis stated the US was still waiting on the OPCW investigation, but there were a lot of media and social media indicators that either chlorine or sarin was used in Douma. On the 14th of April, France, the United Kingdom and the United States launched airstrikes against 4 Syrian government targets in response to the attack. The European Union, in a statement, said that evidence points towards yet another chemical attack by the regime. It is a matter of grave concern that chemical weapons continue to be used, especially on civilians. The European Union condemns in the strongest terms the use of chemical weapons and calls for immediate response by the international community. It also called for the United Nations Security Council to identify the perpetrators and for Russia and Iran to influence Assad against launching attacks. The United Nations on the 10th of April stated that they failed to adapt to 3 competing resolutions on an inquiry into the chemical attack, with Russia and the United States clashing over issues and exchanging military threats. The World Health Organization released a statement with reference to outside media sources that 43 people died while suffering, quote, symptoms consistent with exposure to highly toxic chemicals. thank you for listening to part 3 of the Brief History podcast. This has been the Douma Chemical Weapons Attack Special. Thank you to Harry Edmondson, who composes, does the sound and produces this episode. Please let me know what you think on the social media. We're on Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Be History Podcast. Please like, share, follow, review, give us a 5-star rating. Find us on any podcast directories. Listen to us on your favourite podcast place. Please subscribe. The next episode will be automatically notified then when it comes to. We normally release on a Tuesday, so look out for our next episode. We're not sure what we're going to do next time. Please reach out to us, give us suggestions. There have been a few, like the Crimean War. There's been a suggestion on the siege of Catan, but let us know what you think. We may do a poll on Twitter, or we may take direct suggestions from you guys, so please reach out to us and let us know. As I keep saying, the listeners' generosity really does make a podcast, so please give us a 5-star review. Tell us what you think on where you listen to the podcast. Please like and share. Can't say that enough. Make it your good deed of the day. Give us a 5-star review and tell your friends and family about the podcast. I've been your host, Andrew Knight. This has been the Brief History Podcast. Brief history, comprehensively packed in under an hour. Perfect for your commute home, on your lunch break or in your precious free time. Thank you.